If you have ever wanted to build your own automation but couldn't figure out how to get started, this is the video for you. By the end of it, you'll go from someone struggling to set up your first real working automation to being able to understand the three-step process that must go into every automation that is successful. So, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, this is the video to keep watching. Let's face it, when you learn how to automate with AI, many business processes become easier. They become more efficient in the sense that AI eliminates the repetitive work, the tasks that you need to do over and over again. And even if you're delegating these to other people, their attention can be turned to other higher leverage types of tasks. And there are also cost savings. The more you can automate to a robot that doesn't get sick, that can work 24/7, the more money you spend, which means more return on your initial investments for your business. The problem is that many people struggle with these three components. However, once I really understood what goes into each of these, the way I looked at automations drastically changed. And there are only three steps. Number one are the triggers. So these are the events or signals that initiate the automation process. And I'll get into what potential triggers you might have in a second. The second step is the process, the AI powered steps that transform inputs into the desired outputs. So what happens along that stage after we have these triggers? What are the processes that need to happen in order for us to get to step 3, which is the output? So this is the final result or action that the pipeline delivers. When you break it down into these 3 steps and can really place all things that need to happen into their respective step, you will have better automations. So let's look at these 3 different steps and what goes into each of them. First, we have the triggers, which can be of 3 different types. Number 1 is scheduled, where the automation runs at a predetermined interval or time. Let's say that you have an RSS feed that you want to run every morning before you wake up. So every day at 6 a.m. In my case, I have an automation that runs, that delivers me any new videos, any new content articles, any new blog posts that the people I'm watching have released. And by the time I wake up, I have this ready to go and ready for me to go over it and approve and disapprove a few tasks or actions that I want to take. Which means that I don't need to think about it actually happening. It happens by default every single day. The second is event-driven. So this is triggered by real-time events or changes. If you have used make.com, you'll know that there are specific triggers which happen instantly. When a call is made, this trigger actually kicks into action. This can come from a variety of different sources, which means that other factors can affect your automation and can actually start it, which is great because you don't want to keep wasting resources running scheduled triggers if there might not be anything new. In this case, you want to use event-driven. These can be all different kinds. Let's say that you put a file in a specific folder. Let's say that someone makes a request. There are different types of event-driven triggers that you can use. And the third is user-initiated. So this is activated by a specific user action or a request. And this is pretty straightforward. Someone somewhere clicks on a button or someone somewhere opens a web browser. This is something that is triggered when someone takes specific action. It is similar to event-driven, but it is specifically generated by a user. So this is triggers. And then we have the process. And this can be very different depending on your use case. For example, you have the data ingestion. So here the aim is to collect and prepare the necessary data for the AI model. The trigger might be what starts it, but in this case, we also might need to get additional data from external sources. If we're connecting to something like our table, we might want to grab the necessary information based on a specific record ID. Then we have the model execution. So we run the AI algorithm to transform inputs into desired outputs. Whether we want to use a ChatGPT module, whether we want to use a Claude module, we want to transform data in one way, shape, or form. And finally, we have the integration, where we connect the AI pipeline to your existing systems and flows. So once we have transformed the data that we got in step 1 here, we want to connect it to the next step in wherever it needs to go. It can go back to the same database, updating a few records. It can go to something different. The point is that we get data, we put it through a process, and then we need to connect it to something else, which is also related to the output. So this can be alerts, data updates, workflows. If it's alerts, it can be a notification, whether it's an email to someone, whether it's a Slack message, whether it's anything that allows someone to know that the automation has finished processing. Data updates, so similar to what I mentioned with databases, having automated data entry, reporting, and database synchronization. What you want to do is have a single source of truth. And by having these types of updates as the output, you ensure that this is the case. And then you have workflows. So one automation finishing can also mean that another automation starts. So you can trigger actions and workflows based on the pipeline output. You could also have conditional logic. So if the output is X, then start workflow Y. If the output is Z, then start workflow A, for example. So you can have different workflows that start based on the output of a previously running workflow. And once you understand those 3 steps, it makes it easier to define a well-working automation before you actually start building it in Make.com, in Zapier, in any automation or no-code tool, or even coding. If you're coding it by hand the traditional way, you can understand, or you should understand what goes into it before you actually get started. Once you create your automation flow, it's also good to think about how you can actually scale it down the line. And there are 3 steps to consider in this case as well. Number 1 is think about modules. So you should be building reusable components for easy scaling and maintenance. Rather than have one humongous automation that contains hundreds of modules, it might make sense to have different parts of it modularized in different automations. And then each one finishes and calls the next one, rather than having everything put together, making it difficult to scale and difficult to maintain. Because even if you have a large automation, or the bigger the automation, the more difficult it is to isolate any problems and fixing them without affecting everything else. So if you want to scale, having this modular approach is a very good thing to keep in mind. The second is monitoring. Just because something seems to be working well doesn't mean that it's producing the results that you want. If something is not throwing errors, it doesn't mean that it's giving the output you want. So implementing the right monitoring, ensuring that your automation is working well, ensuring that your pipeline is healthy, that all the steps are functioning according to the way you want them to function, is super important. Because number 3, there's optimization. So even if something is working well, there are always ways to make it better. And this can only, or generally can only be done when you have run automation multiple times. You understand what goes in and out of each part of each process, and also what happens in between the process, which was step 2, as we discussed before. Once you can understand all of that, then you can even optimize further. You can make it better. You can reduce the number of steps required. You can make each step more efficient. So there's a lot that you can do when it comes to scaling your AI pipeline. And finally, when it comes to maintenance, there are 3 steps to consider. Number 1 is documentation. The sooner you start documenting your process and what goes in and out all at each step, the better it will be when it comes to making changes when things aren't working, and even optimizing when things are working, but you know that you can make that thing that much better. Testing, you can test. There's a bunch of ways you can test your automations. You can test parts of it. You can test it as a whole. What I would suggest is, before going live, to always test from A to Z, to ensure that what goes in and what comes out is according to what is required. And finally, when it comes to maintenance, it's also important to understand who owns a specific process. So establish clear ownership and governance for the AI pipeline. if you are working as part of a team, it's crucial that everyone understands what their main responsibilities are when it comes to a specific automation. The last thing you want is for people thinking that others are taking care of something specific, with the other people thinking the same about the initial person. Ensure that it's clear who's responsible for building, maintaining, upgrading, testing each part of the automation, because this is the best way to maintain something that works well and works well over the long term. So that's pretty much it. If you want to start building your automations today and in the future, number one, start small. Think about solving problems that you might have in your business. And when you do, chances are that other business owners, other people might want to get their hands on these solutions to solve their own problems as well. Number two, think about it iteratively, where you continuously refine and optimize your AI pipeline for maximum impact. Improving one single step every single day means you'll have a much better system after 1 week, after a month, after a year. So it's important to make continuous effort to get better. And it's also better to have smaller increments than one big update and then not touching an automation for a very long time. And number three, I would encourage you to explore further. Automations, AI, technology is improving at a very rapid pace. The more you discover, the more you know about how to potentially solve issues, the better your automations will become. There are new technologies coming out, so even if you're using a specific model today, there might be a new model that's better tomorrow. And when you can implement these new models, things might run smoother, things might run better. So there will always be new possibilities to consider. And that's pretty much it. So that was this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you a new perspective on how to think about your automations using the 3 steps we mentioned here, which were the triggers, process, and output. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And in the meantime, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. If you want to get help with your AI and automation, also check out the link in the description, which will guide you on how to do so. I'll speak to you soon.